Guys, can you believe it? The United States Grand Prix weekend is over. I'm exhausted from 3 long days out in the hot Texas sun, but nevertheless, we are here to talk about what we saw over the weekend at Circuit of the Americas. What's going on, guys? Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the United States Grand Prix. I know it was one of the United States Grand Prix of all time, but at the same time, it had a lot of intrigue going through it. We're going to go over the entire weekend. We're going to go over our weekend quick hits. We're going to go over our weekend winners and losers. And then we'll take a look at our predictions as we made them before the weekend began and see how we ended up and how we stand currently in our Community Predictions Championship. And then last but not least, as always, we'll take a look at what is ahead in Formula One. But let's go ahead, jump on into this thing with our weekend quick hits. Let's begin our quick hits section where we always do, and that is at the front. Max Verstappen, a perfect weekend from him. Double pole, double wins in both the sprint and the Grand Prix. It was exactly what Max needed to do this weekend to continue to try and put himself in position to be in position, to potentially be in position to challenge for the championship. With only 5 rounds left and 2 sprints, it is really coming down to the wire, especially with McLaren looking like they have no interest in developing the car further. Red Bull continuing to try and get themselves on top of this car, and I tell you what, Max might just be starting to believe himself. So this is going to be a space to watch. Mexico City is going to tell us a lot about what this championship is going to look like coming down the wire. I, for one, cannot wait to see it, but we'll get there when we get there. But Max Verstappen starting the weekend off right, just like he did in the race, right at the front, right at the top. Obviously, the next place we need to go to is the McLaren drama. Coming into this weekend, there is the drama following the Singapore Grand Prix weekend, and it was the only question on everyone's mind is what is going to happen this weekend. Is it going to quell rumors? Is it going to stir up more drama? And boy, did it get crazy right off the bat. At the beginning of the sprint race, turn 1, lap 1, a double McLaren DNF where Oscar Piastri, while attempting to, up and under his teammate Lando Norris, collides with Nico Hülkenberg, and that is a double McLaren DNF, leading to a Max Verstappen win and 8 points being taken out of both Lando's lead in P2 for the championship and Oscar's lead in P1. So it was a bit of an auspicious start from the McLaren duo, but they had it all left to play for. And then not only that, we had Lando Norris putting it on the front row, only P2 in qualifying, and Oscar Piastri, championship leader, only qualifying P6. So it was a fascinating weekend from the championship perspective, and I tell you what, it's going to get very interesting from here. So McLaren, we'll see where you bounce back in Mexico. You were very good there last year. Can you do it again? Moving on now, Circuit of the Americas is a healing ground for one particular team, and that is Ferrari. They always seem to do well around here for one reason or another, and this year is no different. Coming off of a Singapore Grand Prix where Charles Leclerc was lifting and coasting for literally the entire Grand Prix, and Lewis Hamilton's brakes literally exploded. They come here, Charles Leclerc bags himself a podium, and Lewis Hamilton comes home to finish quite well himself in P4. So a very solid result for Ferrari coming off of a tough Singapore weekend. For whatever reason, Coda and Ferrari just seem to work very well together. So another year of evidence for that, and one of Lewis Hamilton tying his best finish of the year that he had a handful of times else so far this season in P4. So will they be able to carry that over to Mexico? Time will tell. Another track where they seem to do decent at, but as always, the elevation plays tricks and fools of these cars, and so we'll see which teams show up with the right packages, but we'll only know once we get there. A couple of my seating position related events happened in this race. I, as always, for the 4th year in a row, have found myself sitting in turn 15 with my wife. It was a lovely time as always, but at the same time, while it is one of the best complex of corners in the entire world, in my opinion, very rarely have we seen too much drama going on there at all. In this Grand Prix, we actually got 2 moments right in front of us that we got to see firsthand. The first of which was Carlos Sainz and Kimi Antonelli coming together. Sainz sending one down the inside of the young rookie before ultimately collecting him. Piastri bouncing off the wall very lightly. Sainz ultimately ending up dropping out of this one with a retirement of his own. It was a bit of a clumsy move. I think this was a move where if Carlos was going on against anybody else besides maybe a rookie, I think he might get away with it. But at the same time, Kimi had every right to turn into the corner. Unfortunately, both of their races effectively ended with Carlos actually ending. The second moment was the Ollie Behrman versus Yuki Tsunoda battle. Yuki ultimately deciding on a given lap, I can't remember exactly which one it was off the top of my head, deciding to defend the extreme inside. Ollie thought he was going there the entire way before ultimately having to bail out onto the grass, cutting the corner, and ultimately spinning off at the exit of turn 15. Now, thankfully, he was able to spin it back up and continue on running in the points, but at the same time, it did cost him potentially 2 positions where he definitely looked like he had the pace to get around Yuki Tsunoda if he had been a bit more patient, and also ultimately losing out a position to Nico Hülkenberg behind, who made his way through with Ollie struggling to clean off his tires and probably a bit of flat spotting as well. So a tough weekend for that corner in particular, but as someone who is sitting there, I'll take it every time. I mentioned it already. I have to talk about my team. Ollie Behrman finishing in the points on home soil for Haas. Absolutely fantastic weekend, especially following a pretty tough sprint race with Esteban Ocon being murdered by Lance Stroll and Ollie Behrman getting himself a 10-second penalty for defending against Kimi Antonelli. So a nice little bounce back there, and as they mentioned over the radio, it is not too shabby to be disappointed by a P9 finish. So ultimately, I'll take this every single day of the week. And then last but not least in this section, we have to talk about the news that came out before the Grand Prix began. It is that the Circuit of the Americas and the United States Grand Prix have been renewed to stay on the calendar through the 2034 season. This is fantastic news. The US Grand Prix and COTA have been a staple top 5 race weekend on the calendar for as long as I've been watching. And so to see that the news, we're losing such iconic tracks around the world, the fact that this one is able to stay, I think, is a huge, huge win. And while it is on the same trajectory as Miami, which also got a lengthy extension, I think this one is we can all look at and say, well deserved. All right, let's quickly move on to our weekend winners and losers. And I think, honestly, I don't think there's really too much to say about either of them because I feel like they are pretty obvious, especially considering there really wasn't a whole lot going on elsewhere around the track to really give out any of these obvious solutions. For my weekend winner, it has to be Max Verstappen. I mean, to double pole, double win, a perfect weekend from Max has to put him in our weekend winner spot. Obviously getting the maximum amount of points as he continues to somehow fight his way towards a championship. I think he's now only, 30 something odd points behind Lando and only, 40 something odd points behind Oscar. So it is a bit of a long shot. But at the same time, no matter how long the shot seems to be, it is still theoretically possible. Even George Russell is still mathematically able to win the championship. So it is going to get very interesting, especially considering that, the Red Bull seemingly has become one of, if not the best car on the grid, as McLaren has famously stopped development on this year's car. Red Bull continuing to try and eke out little bits here or there. It seems like they're finally back on top of the car. It is going to get very, very, very interesting from here. Next up, let's go over our weekend loser, and for this one, it is definitely a big picture weekend loser. It is Oscar Piastri. A very, very tough weekend for Oscar, coming off of a Singapore Grand Prix, which ultimately didn't go his way. It was one of those that just did not seem to go from the jump. I mean, a double DNF in the sprint race when you continually just need to get any kind of points, especially just to stave off Max Verstappen, right? If you can just push Max just far enough outside, I think you'll feel a lot more comfortable. But now that you're having to hold off your teammate and a charging Max Verstappen, it is a lot harder to do. Follow that up by Lando Norris putting it on the front row for the Grand Prix qualifying, and you only qualifying P6 and having to fight your way forward, ultimately only moving up into P5. It was always going to be a tough weekend for Oscar from there. It is a tough way to go. Max ultimately ends up taking the win and the aforementioned maximum amount of points. Lando Norris ultimately finishing P2 when Charles Leclerc was unable to hold him off down the stretch in this one as well. It is a tough weekend for Oscar, and the fact that while he still does hold the championship lead, he has absolutely no momentum going on for him. All right, let's move on now. Our predictions, results, the predictions we made before the weekend began. Let's see how we did. We will begin with our pick for biggest positive surprise, and we went with Ferrari. I successfully managed to pick Ferrari to actually perform very well. It was one of those weekends that kind of was really hit or miss. But ultimately, when it came down to it, in the Grand Prix itself, Charles Leclerc bags himself a podium after running P2 most of the race, before ultimately finishing P3, and Sir Lewis Hamilton finishing P4, tying his best result of the season. So that is a single solid point for me in this one. Absolutely cooking whatsoever. Now, as we move on to biggest disappointment, this is a one singular asterisk that I'm going to be putting on my scorecard for this weekend of 2. We will get to that one later. If you watched my predictions video, you might know where I'm going with this. My biggest disappointment this weekend was Haas F1 team. It was a bit of a reverse psychology move against the universe, and it unfortunately looked like it was on going through the sprint race and potentially even qualifying, but that was before Ollie Behrman put it into Q3 and ultimately came home to finish in P9, a very solid result. So ultimately, I went with a half point for me in this prediction, because if it wasn't for Kimi Antonelli and Carlos Sainz having their moment, Ollie potentially doesn't even finish in the top 10. And outside of that, with the horrid sprint race that was, again, Esteban Ocon getting murdered by Lance Stroll and Ollie Behrman getting a 10-second penalty, effectively pushing him basically last. It was a long weekend, and does 2 points really save it? I'm not sure, but one good session basically out of 4. I don't know if it's good enough, but I went with a half point. I put it up to the community. Feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as well. Let's move on to qualifying now. My qualifying order was Max Verstappen pole position, a Lando Norris P2, and I went with an Oscar Piastri P3. Obviously, that one did not happen, but Max did take pole and Lando did take second, so we will take our 2 points moving on from there. As we'll move on to our sprint winner, I went with Lando Norris. It was Max Verstappen, so we will very quickly march through there as no points for me on that one. As we move on to my race podium prediction, and my race podium was a Max Verstappen win, an Oscar Piastri P2, and a Lando Norris P3. So only 1.5 points on my podium this week. I thought for a little, honestly, a good majority of the race that I could potentially still steal 2 points with Charles Leclerc finishing second, but ultimately Lando remembered that he has the fastest car on the grid. Maybe. And ultimately, at minimum, it's definitely faster than the Ferrari. We can all agree on that. Ultimately, he ended up finishing in second, Charles Leclerc taking home the final podium spot. So 1.5 points for me on there. But at the same time, we're cooking. So remember that. As we come now to probably the biggest item of contention in my predictions, and this is definitely going to go up for debate over the course of probably the beginning part of this week in the Discord, is my one crazy prediction, which was a double Williams points finish this weekend at Circuit of the Americas. Now, I might have to go back and listen to my exact wording on this, right? Because we did get a Williams double points finish, but it was a double points finish in the sprint race, which, theoretically is harder to do than a full Grand Prix, because it only plays points out to P8 rather than P10. So it, in theory, is even harder to do. So it's an even more impressive feat that they did it. Ultimately, obviously, Carlos ends up DNFing from the Grand Prix. Alex Albon has a lap time deleted thanks to track limits in qualifying. He effectively started last, and ultimately there were no Williams points at all in the full Grand Prix. But at least as of right now, I'm giving myself the point. I have to see what people in the Discord say, what you lovely people on YouTube have to say, as well as go back and listen to my exact wording, because it is going to get very specific. But as of right now, I'm taking the loophole. We'll put an asterisk next to the next to my point total over the weekend. But at the same time, cooking this weekend. If I'm allowed to keep those, cooking. If not, still doing okay. But at the same time, I think I cooked this weekend. But let's go ahead. Let's take a look and see what our results look like for the weekend. If I get all of my points, I tab 6 points on the weekend, which is absolutely huge for me. And if we take a look at our standings as of right now, I, with these tentative points applied, currently lead the championship now with 5 rounds to go on 68 points. So realistically, even if I lose 1.5 points, I'm still in the lead. So we got to remember that. But I now sit at provisionally P1 in the championship with 68. We have British TTG with 66, Sentinel 40 with 64.5, which I'll point out, he also would lose a half point because he also put Haas as his biggest disappointment. And then F1 Inferno rounding it out with a solid result on 60 points as well. So realistically, it's still technically anyone's race. We are 5 rounds left of the season, which includes 2 more extra bonus points up for grabs for a sprint winner. So it is anyone's game. I cannot wait. Let me know what you think about my predictions, and should I get the point? Let me know down in the comment section below. But guys, that leaves only one question remaining. What is next in Formula One? And it is the Mexico City Grand Prix. Not but a week from now, we will be back once again, debating wheel and seeing who knows what. Last year we saw, what was it? It was a Sainz, Norris, Leclerc podium. It was a Carlos Sainz kind of masterclass, honestly. It was one of those that he took from the jump and ran away with it. Mexico City offers a lot of very different conditions than a lot of these other circuits around the world. I, for one, cannot wait to see it. It's going to be very interesting. If a team gets on top of their car and then, the downforce necessary, it can lead to very good things. But if you mess it up, you're in for a world of hurt. Which teams will get it right? Which teams will get it wrong? I'm not sure. But all I know is we'll be back in a few days to make these exact same predictions. Sans a sprint race winner. Not but a few days from now. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the United States Grand Prix weekend. It was such a pleasure and a privilege for me to go and see it in person again. It was so much fun always to see just the passion that is growing within the United States, and it was absolutely insane with the amount of people that were there this weekend. We'll be back in a few days for our predictions video, and back not but a week from now to be chatting exactly what we saw in the Mexico City Grand Prix. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.